Okay, welcome to episode 3 of Cine-Lit. My name is Adam Marsh. I am the cinema programmer at Quad, a independent cinema in Derby. I'm joined by my co-host Rebekah.
Hi, I'm the film officer here at Quad.
And we are delighted to be joined today by film lecturer David Leicester.
Yes, hello. My last appearance here was doing the midweek treat, the introduction to that, this last Wednesday.
Fantastic.
And I'll be there again next Wednesday.
And every Wednesday.
Indeed.
If we allow him a holiday, maybe he'll have one day off. We don't know yet. We'll look into that. But today we're not here to talk about David's midweek treats. We are here to talk about Streetcar Named Desire, currently getting a re-release into UK cinemas with a restoration by the BFI. So that's a perfect opportunity to discuss the film, the play, and the actors involved, some amazing actors involved, and also the controversial director and his history with the Hollywood blacklist and the House of Un-American Activities in the 50s. So let's start. Let's start. Let's crack on. Before we start, maybe I should ask you guys a question. Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
No.
No, okay.
Yes, flirted with membership of the Labour Party.
Yeah.
That might qualify these days.
Yes, so here we are. We're talking Streetcar Named Desire. Becky, you know much more about this subject than I do. For my shame, I only saw this film yesterday for the very first time. Yeah, so it's not through any real reason. I went through a period in the mid-2000s where I decided I was no longer ever going to watch a classic film on video, DVD, or television.
Why?
Because they were re-releasing them in cinemas all the time. Hence, they are releasing this one now. And I think, well, I'll just wait till it comes on in the cinema. And that works until you get so frustrated that you want to see Casablanca and no one's showing it, and you're like, ah!
Yes.
So, you know, but as a consequence, I've had a good 10, 15 years where I haven't watched a lot of classics on video or DVD, and this is one of the...
Not even Carry On Camping.
Oh, well, I've watched Carry On Camping more times than I can remember.
I mean, everyone has on my TV.
It's punishment on a bank holiday Monday. I think. Becky, you're much more familiar with this area than I am, so where do you think we should start?
Yeah, well, it's kind of strange, Adam, that you said about you didn't watch any classic films on video or DVD because you thought it's bound to come into the cinema. I actually discovered Streetcar on DVD. I was a fan of Vivien. Leigh. I'd seen, obviously, Gone with the Wind comes on every Christmas Day, and I was familiar with her work. So I was really excited when I found out that the film was going to be re-released, because actually this is my favourite Vivien Leigh film. So yeah, I discovered it on DVD, and I've actually always loved like stage adaptations on film because it kind of bridges my two loves, film and theatre. And I really like this film, and I also think it's quite interesting when you look at particularly the role of Blanche Dubras, played by Vivien Leigh, and what was going on in her life at the time when this film was made. And then obviously it's an early role of Marlon Brando, who I love as well. On the Waterfront is one of my dad's favourite films, so I was made to watch that before I watched Streetcar. So for some reason, I always thought that On the Waterfront was before. But yeah, when researching, I found out that it actually was afterwards. And again, that's another Elias Kazan film.
What was your first introduction to Streetcar Named Desire?
Well, it would have been on DVD.
On DVD, yeah.
I mean, I would have been too young when it came out to see it at the cinema. And of course, I mean, I don't think... Well, it's been on TV since, but I don't know when the first time it was screened on TV would have been.
No, I don't know.
Possibly the 70s.
Yeah.
But I would have seen it on... I probably would have seen it on TV first.
Yeah.
But certainly, I have the DVD now and have watched it again.
It's quite a powerful film in the sense of that it's the classic 1950s studio set Hollywood feature. It's still shot in, I think, one standard Academy ratio, 1:37 sort of thing. So, you know, it has that classic cinema feel to it. But I don't think it feels that visual in the way it's shot, that you're going to lose that much by watching it on DVD, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it's difficult to say now. I mean, I still haven't seen it on a big screen. Okay. So, you know, it's I will when it's released.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, same for me as well. I've actually never seen it on the big screen. I've tried to go to... I know that there has been a few cinemas that have released it, but I've never had the opportunity to see it on the big screen. I'm not expecting to see necessarily visually be blown away, but just sort of to see it how it was meant to be seen, and how it was originally shown is probably more important to me.
Yeah. So okay, going back to the origins of things, obviously Tennessee Williams' play. Obviously, it was the one that cemented his reputation after the success of The Glass Menagerie. This is one that established him as one of the leading forces of American theatre, I guess, in the 20th century. I mean, he's one of the 3 or 4 top American playwrights of the century. But this play was developed with Elias Kazan, the director of the film, in mind, because he directed the very first stage adaptation. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So it's an unusual one because they brought the entire cast over, almost the entire cast over from the stage play to the film.
Yeah, and I think that's quite interesting in the fact that they majority of the cast are from a method background, from the Actor Studio, which Kazan was one of the co-founders of. So it's a strange and unique one in the sense of the theatre production was moved to film, and that the origins of the theatre production are evident in the film. The decision to bring it over is quite unique, because obviously a lot of films you think, the theatre production was better or the book was better, but it's quite interesting that they took the team that were involved in the theatre production over to the film.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that at the time Elias Kazan didn't necessarily have a reputation in Hollywood. He'd made a few films, but he was probably still more associated with the stage than the screen. I've seen his first feature, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Again, a project which grew from a stage production. And maybe you have a sense there of an outside world because the window is being used. It's looking out to the streets of Brooklyn and so on. It doesn't have the power and force that Streetcar and subsequent films have, although the society is similar.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that I found interesting with we were talking about the method acting is that Vivien Leigh, who is not from that background, she was in the original London cast of Streetcar, as directed by Laurence Olivier, her husband at the time. She's very much traditional British stage actress, RADA, that kind of background. That's an interesting mix, I guess, with the film production. Yeah,
I mean, obviously she'd been an American before in Gone with the Wind, and proved her credentials there. But maybe the studio wanted Vivien Leigh because she had a name on screen. The other actors didn't necessarily have one. Yeah. Although they would have... I mean, was this Marlon Brando's first film?
Not his first film, but it's one of his first leading roles, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, he actually auditioned for... there's a screen test of him auditioning for Rebel Without a Cause in the 40s when they were trying to get that up and running.
Yeah.
So that's out there now in the wonders of the modern world, where you get 20th century DVDs and all that hidden footage. You got a screen test of Marlon Brando in 47, I think it was, for Rebel Without a Cause.
I mean, I don't know what the budget would have been on this film. Well, you know, how much faith the studio had in Streetcar as a commercial vehicle.
Yeah. I guess Williams as a playwright was a big deal, and the play was a massive success. It ran for like 800 productions or something like that. You know, when the American one, like 300, 400 of the British one as well. So it was obviously a massive success.
Yeah.
So I bet they would have thrown a bit of budget at it, because I mean, it looks nice. The set design is really good.
That's right. Yeah.
It's very well lit, the film.
Yeah. Also, they decided, you know, obviously the plays all on the stage, takes place in the apartment, but the film version has a few shots, and it's sort of the opening shot of the streetcar in New Orleans, and it kind of New Orleans becomes a character within itself, which is different to
it does broaden it out a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about performances then. So we touched on Vivien Leigh. So Vivien Leigh, let's a very specific connection with her and this role and her real life struggles with mental health issues. Obviously, that mirror the character in the film. What were they thinking? Casting Vivien Leigh, who was obviously struggling with mental health issues, in a role that forced her to go very deep into that performance.
Yeah, to be honest, they probably weren't aware of the effects of mental health at that time.
No, possibly not. But I mean, it was her husband who cast her in the role on the stage, wasn't it?
Yeah, but again,
if we think about the pressure that Judy Garland was under from the studio, I'm sure that Vivien Leigh would have been under some kind of similar pressure, maybe.
Yeah.
You know, she was a star. They wanted her to make money for the studios, and I don't think they necessarily would have cared too much about the state of her mental health.
No, I guess not. I mean, there's a quote from John Gielgud, who was a lifelong friend of Vivien Leigh. He said, "Blanche was so very like her in a way. It must have been the most dreadful strain to do it night after night. She would be shaking and white and quite distraught at the end of it." It's because he was in the stage adaptation in London. So it was obviously something on the minds of the actors at the time, and then she still went over and did it in the movies.
Yeah. I was listening to some interviews from Kim Hunter, who plays Stella, last night, and she says, even off set, some of her behaviour was a bit strange. She liked to go out and have fun and party when they weren't on set and things, and there was a few times it was obvious that the role was taking a strain on her health.
I guess it's fascinating in the sense of that everyone's method acting, and the one actress who isn't method actress is probably being more method on this movie than anybody else,
But some could argue that might be some of the problem, in the fact that all the other actors were trained in method. They might have learned skills in way to, even though the whole point of method is to become that character, but they're able to remove it, where Vivien may not have developed those acting skills because she comes from such
also I think it's worth reminding ourselves that Elias Kazan was a director of actors and had been for a number of years on the stage. I mean, Marlon Brando said he was the best director he'd worked with. And also, I think, to his credit, Elias Kazan recognised talent in actors. He thought Marlon Brando was the peak. He just thought he had a versatility, a wide range, which he didn't see in James Dean. He appreciated the talent that James Dean had for certain kinds of roles, but he knew that Marlon Brando would be capable of a wide range, and he saw that in the early days.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he gets an amazing performance out of practically everyone on the set on Streetcar. I guess the one that obviously stands out is Brando's, because he was fresh and new, and he was suddenly a top 10 Hollywood bankable star after this film. Let's talk about a little bit of his performance, because it's amazingly layered.
Yes, it is.
I was expecting it to be fairly, not one-dimensional, but fairly stagey, in the sense of like, this is where he is, and he's the foil for Vivien Leigh. But there's so much to that character.
Well, in some ways, he's as disturbed as Stella is.
Very much so.
Well, it's conflicted, let's say.
Definitely conflicted,
and you do have the themes of sex and violence not being separate, being part of the same entity. Certainly, with Brando's character Stanley. I mean, it's there. You can see there that the conflict is there within him, and he's carrying out this battle within himself. And obviously, it's affecting his relationship with his wife as well. It's spilling over, not just within himself, but it's affecting the whole household there. And it's always on the brink of collapse.
You do feel that there's that. At any moment, something's going to happen. Something that tension is always in the air definitely with like Blanche and Stanley's characters. There's just always something there that's going to explode.
There is also, I think, class. And I mean, Elias Kazan was certainly aware of class. I mean, when he had a scholarship to go to Yale to act, he dropped out because he was a poor boy amongst a load of rich kids. And I think he always had this kind of wariness of the wealthy classes.
I mean, I was just saying this morning. It's one of those. In some ways, it's very much of its time, but in other ways, I can see why the play keeps getting revived and keeps getting revived on the stage, and year after year after year, because the themes of class structure, the themes of immigration, those kind of themes are constantly relevant.
Well, sex and violence is very much
and sex and violence. Absolutely.
But what I think makes Vivien Leigh and Marlon Brando's performance so good is you can feel that tension. And I think it's more on Brando's part, from the beginning. He kind of is like that irritating thing of like somebody that just like keeps on like nudging you, and you can feel the tension to the point of boiling point. I've seen other productions, but the film, I've seen it so many times, but it's still, his performance is brilliant in the sense of he's just so irritating. You're like, and he's got he creates that sort of like mask at the start of the film where he's I've got an associate lawyer friend of mine. He's got all these associates that he knows that can help him out with this, that, and the other, and he's putting on this front, and he obviously that front, that mask slowly slips away as the movie goes on, and
I mean, who has the power in that household in the duration of that play is open to question. I mean, he's the more volatile, the more forceful one, but that doesn't necessarily suggest that he is someone who is controlling, able to control.
Yeah, and he's a very vulnerable character, but I kind of feel like he has to control that flat because that's the only part of his life he can control, and create an illusion in that flat. Like as soon as he leaves for work, I feel he feels suppressed. So it's kind of like he comes back from that suppressed situation into the flat, and in return suppresses
the king,
Stella,
the king
and
of his own
Blanche.
domain, as he mentioned in the plays. He's the king, isn't he?
Yeah.
I found it fascinating when I was reading about this morning that originally Tennessee Williams envisaged Stanley as a much older character, and when they obviously, because the film and the play were so connected, when they cast Marlon Brando, it changed the play, and it became less about a vicious old man bitter at the world, and it became more about the callousness of youth and that those kind of things, which I found fascinating. That it wasn't there in the original version.
It must be better as it's cast.
I think so, absolutely. I think and Brando obviously had a massive role in shaping that play, which is again the alignment of the film and the play and the American culture.
Yeah, and he has that energy, that in a reserve of energy, which is always desperate to express itself. Yeah, which is obviously suitable for someone of his age.
I thought Kim Hunter's performance was exceptional and quietly exceptional in the sense that because she in some ways is the only sane character in that room for many of the time, she brings a balance to Blanche and Stanley's characters. I thought it was a remarkable performance, really.
Yes, it is, yeah. And we recognise that when Stanley is calling out to her desperately, is one moment maybe of emotional honesty, of you do sense a genuine attraction there and a genuine need on the part of Stanley.
Yeah.
And to some extent then, in that situation at least, the Kim Hunter character has the power.
No, absolutely. I think that when you were saying who has the power, I think in many ways Stella does have that power. She's got the power over her sister in many ways, despite her being the younger sister. She's got the power over Stanley for what we've just been talking about. Yeah, so it's an interesting role that easily can get overlooked, I think, in the more showy...
That's what I would say as well, in the sense of you've got to acknowledge that Brando and Leigh's performances are so good because they're supported by Hunter's performance, and the more subtle and, like you said, the more
maybe sympathetic characters as well. The Carl Morden character as well. They're both quite sympathetic.
Yeah,
it's an interesting role. I only really know Carl Malden from playing gangsters, basically, and seeing him in that quite a sensitive role is
Where does it very, very well.
Very,
very
well,
attractive performance.
Yeah, no, it's the conflicts he faces in that movie are very realistic, of the time, realistic problems that he's facing. And it's interesting. Yeah, how old do we think Blanche is? Because we had this conversation this morning, and I think she's supposed to be in her 30s, so obviously way past her prime. Put her out to pasture, send us the old folks home. I guess when we recast this movie in later generations, they're definitely playing her older now.
Yeah, I mean, there was the recent stage production which was broadcast at cinemas, which had Gillian Anderson in that part. Someone probably I don't know, is she in her 40s now?
Gillian Anderson, I guess, 40s.
Yeah,
maybe
I mean,
50s,
interestingly, I was watching recently her performance in Great Expectations, which she did for TV as Miss Havisham. She initially plays it as a very girly character, but as she ages, she becomes more brittle and really shows her age in a very effective way. And I felt. As I remember when I saw it, the broadcast in cinema with her performance, there was a sense there that here was someone who's clearly beautiful, but she is of her age.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't seem that they're. I guess they've moved in with society's signs being 36 years old or whatever. Blanche is supposed to be in the 50s version. Is not the death sentence they're making out nowadays. I don't think it was a death sentence back then either, but that's the way Hollywood pitched it, definitely. So interesting. This time changes. We have different interpretations of that. Let's move on to Elias Kazan, because Elias Kazan had an interesting 1950s as a decade went on. He was involved he was classified as a friendly witness for the House of Un-American Activities, Red Menace, Red Hunt through Hollywood. How do we think that affected his career?
Well, I mean, positively in commercial terms, he was very friendly for the studios had no problem, obviously, hiring him for future projects.
Yeah,
and also, he claims that because he'd named names, it improved the quality of his filmmaking, which is that's a subjective view.
That's a bold claim.
It is a bold claim, and it could be read as a defensive one.
Possibly,
It's no justification. And he never apologised, and he never said that he was coerced. People were offering him kind of a way out, a way of abandoning his previous stance, but he never took it.
No.
And of course, he was honoured with a lifetime Oscar at the end of his life. Yeah. Very controversial at the time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of half the room stood up and applauded, and half the people refused to stand in the seat. So it's still a contentious issue, I guess the one thing I'm looking at, it's all very well looking at it from the hindsight of history and saying, oh, why didn't you not name names and be blacklisted yourself?
Yes, I mean, he would have been blacklisted.
He would have been,
he'd been a member of the Communist Party.
Exactly,
18 months he was there. Apparently, he withdrew from the Communist Party because the theatre group he was working with, which had Lee Strasberg as part of it, was being taken over by the communists, he suggested.
Yeah.
And that probably stayed in his mind, that maybe he felt that he'd been betrayed by communists, by the Communist Party of America, and maybe he felt that therefore he was justified in making his opposition public.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows what his motivation was for this? Apart from the fact that he had to do something, otherwise he would have been blacklisted.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think maybe it's all very well to say, why didn't you do that? But in the atmosphere of paranoia and witch hunting that was going on in the 1950s amongst Hollywood. It's very easy to say you should have done this, but when actually faced to it, it's meant like, well, I can't work, I can't feed my family, I can't. There's a slight amount of sympathy that it must have been a very difficult decision from anybody who gave testimony during that.
Yeah.
Okay, going into the blacklist might be a future podcast.
Yeah, but I think as well it's difficult to separate art to the person, in the sense of, I think with the Lifetime Achievement Award, I think they're more looking at the side of him on the filmmaking side and not taking it.
Sure. I mean, there are some, using a flimsy parallel maybe, we could talk about Clint Eastwood now. We know what Clint Eastwood's politics are like. When we see his films, some of his films, it's very difficult, for me anyway, not to think about his political background and how that's affecting his attitude towards the characters that he's portraying. Yeah. Interestingly, I think they're more nuanced now than they would have been, say, 20, 30 years ago when he was, directing.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. And I think it's different between having certain politics to actually giving names of other people. That's
the thing. Because obviously, like, he was involved in the actual studio. He was involved in bringing the stage play to relevance, bringing the film of Streetcar to a wide audience, and one of his cast members was blacklisted.
Yeah.
During that period, Kim Hunter did not really work.
Yeah.
For much of the. It became very apparent within a couple of years after she'd done Streetcar and was nominated for an Oscar that she won an Oscar, didn't she?
Yeah, she won it.
She won the Oscar.
Best Supporting Actress.
Yeah, so it became very apparent in the subsequent years after that she was blacklisted. And she said she'd not recognised it at the time, but it was like slowly the doors started closing for her right up until the late 60s when she did Planet of the Apes, I guess, when she started to come back. And also Hollywood was being a bit more relaxed on bringing some of those blacklisted actors back. So it's interesting from that point of view that he must have had a close relationship with her.
Yeah.
So it's not just shopping random people, it's shopping your friends, your colleagues. That's a fascinating, difficult thing to... Yeah.
I think it's more the betrayal. It's different. You can have one certain opinion or something, but it's the fact that you're actually telling on these people.
I think it's tempting to get the view after Streetcar that he knew exactly what kind of films he wanted to make. And I get the sense that he was so focused on his projects that he kind of blanked out what was going on politically outside. I mean, that's not to say that his films are not politically engaged. They were, and they continued to be so throughout the rest of that decade and beyond. The nature of the subject matter of his films didn't necessarily change. He would work with Tennessee Williams again on Baby Doll, for instance. He was adapting John Steinbeck and so on with East of Eden. So the politics, the confrontational politics, are still there in the films that he was going to make afterwards. On the waterfront, even the politics in something like East of Eden, they're still there, and they're still nuanced.
Yeah.
These are weighty projects, really.
So what do we think is the lasting legacy of Streetcar Named Desire? Obviously, the theatre production is probably, though we're still doing theatre productions long after we're all dead of this play. But what about the film in specific? Has it had an impact?
I think more, with Brando's performance. I think when you think of Streetcar, you think of the scene where Brando's Stanley shouts up to Stella up the staircase, and that I think will always be present in popular culture.
Yeah, that's a bit problematic, though, isn't it? Really, because it's setting it in stone and saying, "I'm looking at this man at this age, in that year." If we're seeing it just as a kind of museum piece, then the work itself is not having any future life. And clearly, it does continue to have a future life. The fact that it was a stage presentation which was put on the screen, we're thinking things like Fences more recently. It's a similar kind of setup. You're getting it's something which came from the stage and has been turned into a film. Film, I think, sometimes can give an added power because cinema does that. You're in the dark, there's a huge face on the screen. You can't get away from it. The power of cinema is there.
Yeah, and it's there forever. It's accessible, which is why there's a difference between theatre and film.
Yeah, and also I think if a young person now, a teenager, saw Streetcar for the first time, I think they would be quite impressed.
And that's a wonderful way to end the podcast on. Thank you so much, David, for coming for this, and we will be back next month where we'll be discussing the history and the legacy of James Bond.